Hello, welcome to the Tim Booker channel. I wish you an enjoyable listening experience. Today, the book I'll be interpreting for you is Idiot Brain. Have you ever had these experiences? You know more than others, but you can't seem to win an argument. You know someone, but you can't remember their name. And after a breakup, you spend days on the couch, barely moving, except to wipe your tears and blow your nose. Why does this happen? The book I'm interpreting today will tell you it's because the brain is a bit foolish. Many people think the brain is smart and mysterious, serving as the bridge between human experience and the unknown world. However, the author of this book, British neuroscientist Dean Burnett, believes that the brain is indeed complex and intriguing, but if we treat it as something beyond criticism, it becomes less interesting. The brain is not always rational and orderly, so he wrote this book to introduce the brain's frequent mishaps. Dean Burnett is also a stand-up comedian, so you don't need to worry about dull and hard-to-understand explanations. This book bridges the gap between neuroscience and everyday life, allowing you to happily learn everything about the brain. We often say and do silly things, experience uncontrollable emotional problems, all because our brains are not perfect. Their intelligence is not very high, their personalities aren't ideal, and sometimes they even crash. Today, I will delve into 3 aspects to explain the brain's imperfections. Let's start with why the brain's intelligence is not very high. One of the first signs of the brain's limited intelligence is that it often doesn't recognize its own foolishness. Smart people tend to lose arguments more easily, both online and in real life. Many people have had the experience of being much more knowledgeable than their opponent but still unable to win the argument. Why does this happen? Blame it on our brains. Scientists conducted an experiment where they had a group of participants answer various questions and then estimate how well they did. They found an interesting pattern. People who performed poorly tended to believe they did much better than they actually did, while those who performed well often believed they did worse than they actually did. This discrepancy occurs because people with lower intelligence not only lack intelligence but also struggle to recognize their lack of intelligence. Self-awareness is also a dimension of intelligence. In simple terms, unintelligent people are unaware of their own lack of intelligence. They can't perceive what it's like to be truly intelligent and only gauge their intelligence based on their own experiences. That's why you often see people confidently arguing in areas they don't understand or know little about, even when their opponent has devoted a lifetime to the subject. Conversely, genuinely intelligent people perceive the world similarly. If they find something simple, they assume others must find it simple too, leading them to believe their intelligence is just average. Less intelligent people often exude confidence, while intelligent individuals tend to be more self-reflective. In this way, the less intelligent often win arguments. There's even a term for this phenomenon called the Dunning-Kruger effect, named after the 2 scientists who conducted this research. But even the smartest people can forget names at times. Let's move on to the second sign of the brain's limited intelligence, an unreliable memory system. Many people think the brain's memory works like a computer's, where you can store information in your mental hard drive and retrieve it when needed. However, the human brain's memory is far from reliable. You've likely experienced this: you run into an old friend on the street, and you know them. You even remember childhood memories of shooting slingshots together, but you can't recall their name for the life of you. They approach you, call you by name, and reach out to shake your hand, while you desperately try to remember their name. It's an embarrassing situation. So, why can we recognize faces but struggle with names? Isn't a face and a name equally effective when identifying a person? To understand this, we need to delve into how the brain processes memory. Memory is typically divided into short-term and long-term memory. Short-term memory lasts only about a minute and is sometimes called working memory. Long-term memory can last a lifetime. Short-term memory has a very short duration and a limited capacity. It deals with what you're currently thinking about, similar to a computer's RAM. Researchers estimate that short-term memory can hold only about 4 items at a time. For instance, when you need to remember a sequence of phone numbers, you can only recall about 4 at a time. If you need to remember more, the brain discards what it deems less important to make room for new information. If information is not transferred to long-term memory before it's cleared from short-term memory, you'll lose it forever. Now, let's assume you've successfully stored both a person's face and their name in long-term memory. Your task is only halfway done because the other half involves successfully retrieving this information when needed. Unfortunately, this is quite challenging. The brain uses a dual-track information retrieval system, which includes recognition and recall. Recognition is when you see someone or something and recognize that you've encountered them before, but you can't recall the specifics. Recall is when you remember the details and context of your previous encounter, like opening a document and reading its content. This system has its advantages. It allows you to quickly determine if you've encountered something before without the need for further thought. In the natural world, where harsh conditions exist, anything familiar hasn't posed a threat before, so you can save energy and focus on identifying potential dangers. Recall, on the other hand, is triggered by more complex conditions. Recognition is subconscious and intuitive, telling you that you've seen something before, but you don't necessarily know where it is. Recall requires more deliberate effort that you've encountered this before, haven't you? So, when you're on the street and you encounter an old classmate walking towards you, you immediately recognize that you've seen this person before. But remembering who they are and what your relationship is with them is much more challenging. Your brain needs to access various pathways formed when you originally created this memory. For instance, you recall shooting slingshots together at birds, him treating you to chocolates brought back from overseas, and even visiting his dormitory unit by the river. Numerous specific events come flooding back. Ding dong. You've remembered his name, he's Joker. That name suddenly flashes in your mind like lightning through the dark night sky. Scientists describe moments like this as memory retrieval thresholds, signifying that when familiarity reaches a certain crucial point, the original memory is entirely reactivated. However, target memories are only triggered and the stimulation exceeds this threshold, meaning that to activate all the contents of the memory document, you must invoke many familiar trigger points. This is the way the brain operates in terms of memory, and even though we've used computer analogies to help explain it, the two are quite distinct. If the brain were a computer, it would decide autonomously which information is more important than other information. However, the brain's organization of information is illogical. You must search through random drives and folders to find the data you need. Sometimes, the brain unexpectedly opens especially private or embarrassing folders, just like opening folders containing certain videos or photos. If this were your work computer, you'd probably throw it out of the window. Yet this is precisely how the brain handles memory, unreliable and unpredictable. With the brain's memory system, it's no wonder that learning new vocabulary words can be so challenging. But if you invest a lot of attention and effort, you can make up for these shortcomings. However, don't get too optimistic because the third sign of the brain's somewhat limited intelligence is its difficulty in maintaining focus. You might have experienced situations where, whether in study or work, you're more productive and successful when you concentrate your attention. However, concentrating your attention is not as simple as it sounds, as you often find yourself getting distracted easily. No matter how hard you try to stay focused on your studies or meet a deadline, your thoughts often wander elsewhere. So, why do these problems occur? It's because the brain's management of attention operates differently from what many people believe. First, the capacity of attention is limited. You've probably been in a situation where a group of people are all trying to speak to you at once, and each one insists that you listen to them first. However, you can't possibly listen to all of them simultaneously. Eventually, you resort to saying something like, one at a time, to deal with the situation. This demonstrates that attention is indeed limited, not exceeding the capacity of one channel. Thus, the limited attention must be allocated to the stimuli the brain considers most important. You've likely encountered situations where you're in a noisy classroom or a social gathering where everyone is talking at once. You're in the middle of a conversation with someone, and suddenly, you hear another group mention your name. Your attention is immediately drawn towards them, even if they aren't speaking directly to you. This is known as the cocktail party effect, where your attention is prioritized for what the brain deems important. Sometimes, it goes against your personal preferences. Environmental sounds such as electricity, water, or the crackling of flames and rapidly moving objects are particularly effective at capturing your attention because they signify danger. Ignoring these signals could potentially threaten your life, so even when you're focused on studying or meeting a deadline, a passing fly can still easily divert your attention. This is an instinct the brain has developed through millions of years of evolution. At times, you can't be too hard on it because after all, your primary focus should be on ensuring your survival, which enables you to continue studying and working. In conclusion, the brain can sometimes seem a bit foolish, and if it were an independent person, it might be challenging to call it intelligent. Now that we've discussed why the brain's intelligence isn't particularly high, let's talk about why its personality isn't particularly good. Today, our brain is primarily used for thinking, reasoning, and contemplation, yet this system wasn't present millions of years ago. The brain's most basic function was to ensure the body's survival by using various means, such as resisting natural disasters, defending against wild animal attacks, and finding food. Therefore, a significant portion of the brain's work is dedicated to performing basic physiological functions for maintaining life. This part of the brain is called the reptilian brain. In contrast, the brain regions responsible for consciousness, attention, perception, reasoning, and other higher functions are part of the neocortex. The reptilian brain is ancient and conservative, while the neocortex is flexible and adaptable. The conflict between these two brain regions often leads to confusion and makes people appear irrational and unpredictable. Do you know what the brain's strongest basic tendencies are? One is fear, and the other is hurting. Fear is perhaps the most challenging and unreasonable emotion to overcome. What are you worried about right now? You're moving to a new place in a few days. Are all your things ready? Is the project progressing smoothly? Will your bonus for this month be more than last month's? Your mother has called to pressure you about getting married again. What was that sound I just heard? Could it be a mouse? Whenever you have a moment of spare time, you're immediately inundated by various worries. This is because your brain works tirelessly to make you feel anxious, scrutinizing your surroundings and your to-do list. The brain is wired to recognize potential threats, and it finds them everywhere. In the turbulent course of human evolution, there were dangers everywhere that could lead to actual harm, so the brain had no choice but to develop this habit. However, now that we live in a relatively safe world, the brain hasn't adapted to the times. It's preoccupied with worries, no matter how trivial they may be. All possible negative outcomes, even the most insignificant ones, are labeled as worthy of concern by the brain. This is what leads to various phobias and modern society's prevalent disorders, such as social anxiety. Who hasn't experienced anxiety about social interactions, such as not wanting to make a phone call, refusing to propose a toast, or dreading giving a presentation? Most people have felt this kind of anxiety at some point. When social anxiety becomes so severe that it interferes with normal life, it's considered a genuine social anxiety disorder. The root of social anxiety lies in the fear of negative reactions from others. The brain uses others to calibrate the way it perceives the world and its own position in it. As a result, the approval of others seems incredibly important. On one hand, the brain has a predisposition to predict and worry about negative outcomes. On the other hand, the brain has a strong need for social approval and recognition. These two factors combine to create social anxiety. Making a phone call implies interacting with someone without seeing their facial expressions and other common cues, so some people become particularly apprehensive about this, fearing they might inadvertently offend the other person. Giving a presentation is even more challenging. What if they don't like what I'm saying? What if I freeze up with nerves? The brain uncontrollably envisions various scenarios that lead to negative evaluations and awkward situations. The result is anxiety. People who experience this kind of fear often exhibit avoidance behaviors, actively steering clear of situations that could trigger their fears. While this may help maintain inner peace, in the long run, it can't improve or eliminate the fear. Whether it's fear of taking an elevator or fear of making a phone call, the encouraged approach is to expose yourself to the things you're afraid of as much as possible. When you repeatedly discover that the feared things aren't as frightening as you thought, your past fears gradually diminish. The brain's tendency to stick together is just as widespread as its fear response. Earlier, we discussed how the brain uses others to calibrate itself, meaning that no one can truly be an island. Humans are social animals, and in the harsh environments of ancient times, leaving the collective meant death. So, we had to find a group and become a part of it. This innate tendency to seek a collective is deeply ingrained in every person's genes. To achieve this goal, our brains evolved numerous related functions, such as recognizing the emotions of others and trying to please them to avoid rejection and isolation, which could lead to a grim fate. In modern times, although leaving the collective is no longer as dangerous, our ancient instinct to seek the approval of others and a sense of belonging remains intact. Even those who claim not to care about the opinions of others and defy social norms often form their own collectives. Whether it's punk, goth, counterculture, or the millennial generation, the brain's need for social approval and belonging persists. In fact, a significant part of the brain's functions is dedicated to communication with others, and the people we become are heavily influenced by the people around us. This leads to some peculiar behaviors. Some people have learned to exploit the brain's tendency to please others to get what they want. For example, the foot in the door technique is a highly effective way to make others comply with your requests. Here's how it works: if a friend asks to borrow money for a bus ride, you might agree. Then, they ask for a bit more money to buy a sandwich, and you agree again. They suggest going to a dessert place together, and you start feeling reluctant but agree once more. Finally, they ask to borrow money for a taxi because they've missed the last bus. At this point, you reluctantly agree because you've already agreed to their previous requests. This is a familiar situation for many people. If the friend had asked up front for money to buy dinner and take a taxi, you might have refused. The foot in the door technique works by getting you to agree to small requests to create a self-image as a helpful person, making it harder to refuse later, more significant requests. There's also the door in the face technique, which is the reverse approach. When a friend asks you to store all their belongings at your place, you refuse. But when they later ask if you can lend them your car to move their things, you agree. The brain finds it harder to refuse the first request, even though the second request is more significant. Both of these techniques play on the brain's innate tendency to please others. Speaking of refusing, there's a phenomenon called the downward spiral. It happens when someone experiences a series of hardships, each compounding the next, eventually leading to a deep depression. The brain's default assumptions, like the belief that the world is fair and bad things won't happen as long as we don't do wrong, shatter when faced with an ever-worsening situation. The brain can't maintain a positive outlook in the face of continuous adversity, leading to emotional shutdown, loss of interest in hobbies, and possibly turning to alcohol or drugs for solace. This doesn't improve the situation and often makes it worse. The brain enters a negative spiral of despair, and in these circumstances, you might end up accepting requests you wouldn't have considered initially. Depression, like many other mental health issues, results from situations that surpass the brain's coping abilities. The brain's response to such problems is often to seek refuge in self-destructive behaviors. Seeking help or medical treatment is crucial for those dealing with these issues. There's no need to hesitate because it's not your fault, it's simply a quirk of the human brain. Our understanding of conditions like depression is still evolving, and research is ongoing. However, the critical point is that depression and related mental health issues are not a sign of personal weakness but rather a reflection of the limitations of our brains. Even though our brains have remarkable abilities, they can also be quite foolish at times. These imperfections and even foolishness are part of what makes us human. If our brains were always rational and error-free, our world might lack the richness, unpredictability, and variety that makes life so fascinating. So, when you contemplate the quirks and imperfections of your own brain, remember that these traits are what make us uniquely human. And while our brains can seem a bit foolish, they also contribute to the beauty and complexity of our existence. This is where the true wonder lies. That concludes our discussion for today. Thank you for your support and attention. Please subscribe to the Tim Booker channel, like, and share this valuable knowledge with your friends. Let's combine wisdom with action to achieve our financial goals and create a better future. Thank you, and goodbye.